Good morning. How are you?
Good
Morning.
morning.
Fine. So I have 9 a.m. Do we have,
We're live on Facebook and it's being recorded now.
okay, I think that sounds great. There's Bob.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. We have our advisors. I think I saw both Peter and Nazarene. Yep, there we go. We wanted to just take a few minutes to review our investment performance and make sure that the first is aware of any major changes that we need to have in the next quarter. So I'm going to just hand that right over to Peter and Nazarene.
That sounds great. Thanks, Sophie, and great to see you all. And we have Lorraine Willets with us on the web here as well. So in your packet on pages 1 and 2, you've got the two portfolios.
I'm going to just interrupt. I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry. I should have said this at the start. People, if there are members of the public that want to follow along, this packet is also posted on the MRC website, so they can access it there.
On pages 1 and 2, you've got both portfolios. Just a brief snapshot of performance for you. Continues to be a very interesting environment from a higher level with interest rates. We started off the year with government bonds being 2%. They went as high as 1.75%. And now a 10-year government bond rests at about 1.25%. So continues to be an interesting environment for sure. As the economy continues to recover, rates climbed. And recently they've dropped, and a lot of that is due to coronavirus concerns, whether that's going to slow growth down, and that filters through to interest rates. And what happens is whenever you do have a general concern out there, you tend to slide into government bonds, which is what we've seen lately. It typically will push the price up, and then will push the yields down on bonds. So. And you're also seeing the United States be the best source of return in terms of real return after inflation compared to the rest of the globe. So what that means for both portfolios is we continue to be very conservative in how we approach fixed income investing. We don't try to take on a lot of risk at all. We tend to spread that risk out as much as we can. So again, we're staying relatively short, both the MRC fund and the coastal resources portfolio. So as you look at this on page 1, you've got about 80% of the portfolio that continues to be invested in fixed income, and you've got about 20% there in cash. So it's about a 4 million versus a 1 million mix there. You've got a little bit less than 1 million in cash. Of that 4 million that's invested, you still have a combination of certificates of deposit, and you have some bond mutual funds. Again, nice and spread out. The idea is to reduce and soften that risk as much as we can. Of the CDs that you have there in the MRC account, you've got 2 that come due next year, and we've got 1 that comes due in a longer time frame in about 5 years. So in the short term here, we've added to the Vanguard bond fund that has very low interest rate sensitivity. So, should rates start to climb, which we expect them to do so here at some point, that we want to try to keep that rate sensitivity or that price sensitivity relatively low in the portfolio. So if you're going to compare the two portfolios, the MRC versus coastal resources, it's almost like an apples oranges comparison. I mean, one, the MRC, you've got a lot more cash there. And then the coastal resources portfolio on page 2 is fully invested. There, we started off with a treasury note that matured last year. It's been about 10 or 11 months since that matured. And just to keep the portfolio in a position that's marketable, should you need that money quickly, the bond funds there can easily be converted to cash if need be. So that's what we like about the bond fund approach. Again, coastal resources account, you've got a nice mix of funds there that we continue to invest in. You've got a small international piece, but most of it's in US domestic bond funds. Performance is there, continues to do well. The performance you see there is right through the end of June. So you can see it for the different time periods for both accounts. You can see it since inception, which is the end of January of last year. And then you can see the latest 1 year, the fiscal year to date. So which in our case, it's January 1st through June 30th. So if I were to run this performance through today with rates dropping, both portfolios are up. The tip fee fund's up about 0.64% this year, and the coastal portfolio's 0.45%. So continue to be in a good position. Again, not taking a lot of risk. I went through that very quickly, but what questions do you have on the components inside the funds, the performance there? Kind of a quick overview for you.
Bob, what you got?
I'm just curious about what our exposure on the foreign bond side is. What countries are we investing in?
So on the foreign bond fund, you've got a Vanguard international bond fund that's very spread out. You've got 25% of it's in Asia. You're relatively insulated from what you're seeing in China, Bob. You've got a little, it's about 0.9% of that Vanguard funds in China. A lot of it's European exposure. Very, very little that you have in Asia, and any of the volatility that you're seeing in a lot of it, it's really nice and spread out. Why we like it is for that reason. It continues to be spread out. It's not concentrated in one area. Less than 1% in China, especially today's environment, makes me feel better about it. But the Vanguard fund, when you build in costs, when you build in diversity, everything ex-US is exactly where I want it to be. So it's nice and spread out. But you've got mostly European exposure there.
A follow-up. How do the returns compare, and do we have any foreign exchange exposure with the foreign investments?
The Vanguard bond is a hedged, so it's designed to offset any of the currency movements that you're going to see, which tends to be a good thing if you have a strengthening dollar, which is what we've seen for a very long time, for the reasons I gave before, with that interest rate differential, with the US being the cleanest dirty shirt, if you will, with a higher rate. We've had a strengthening dollar, but with the international fund, that's hedged, which makes me feel better. So I can dive in deep if you want to, Bob, at some point, but yeah, they tend to invest in some things that hedge that exposure. Especially if you have a headwind of a rising currency with US dollar, repatriating that money back in the US is a lot easier to do when you have a hedged fund.
Thank you.
Kind of a question for the group. We've got a little less than $1 million there in the MRC portfolio. Any changes recently with the expectations are for funds coming out in the near term?
No, not since we've talked, since George and I have spoke to your side. We just no immediate changes as of right yet.
Thanks, Mike. And let me know if there's anything that we can do differently there. Again, trying to balance the idea. Want to continue generating return for you, but also, keeping that risk managed continues to be important. So obviously, we'll continue to be in touch quite a bit, and making sure we're satisfying the cash needs and disbursements as they come up.
Super, thank you for that.
Any other questions?
It looks like we have a quiet board. That never happens. I want to thank Nazarene and Pete from the First for joining us and just doing this general overview. I think as we've kind of been in a holding pattern for a while, and I think the next check-in will be a little bit more vibrant. But I really appreciate you coming and giving us a general overview. That was really nice to have.
My pleasure. We appreciate your business, and it's great to see you all. Hopefully we can meet in person again here soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pete.
Bye.
Yeah.
So moving on, if I can get myself organized. Next item on the agenda is actually a discussion about our current assets, our projected cash flow and income and liabilities, which is a really long-winded way of saying, I think it would make sense for George to just briefly go through the asset management letter with us, because he lays it all out very nicely, and it would give us an opportunity to get into the weeds with him if we needed to.
Okay, thank you, Sophie, and I'm happy to do it. In terms of the asset management letter, a couple of things. I guess typically if we go through the letter, I typically go through the balance sheet in Word starting on page 3 and then in numbers at the back as part of table 1, the balances in the different accounts. So just to go through that, as a reminder, the D&D account, the development and distribution account, formerly the custody account, has balances that tend to swing. It's being used for 2 purposes. One is for the distributions to the members. And the numbers aren't always clean because not all the members deposit their checks when they're received. Sometimes there are significant lags, and we have to make sure we're watching that when we reconcile the balances. But typically we'll transfer money in from the tip fee stabilization fund and then transfer money out and then pay the distributions. The other is the money that's going out to pay for facility expenses, which this quarter has started to go down, in particular because the MRC has pushed back and expenses have been paid by the either by the bondholder trustee or managed by Delta Thermal. But again, so those are the reasons the balances swing. They're about $26,000, $25,977.36 at the start of the quarter, but the balances in that fund are typically funded by transfers from the tip fee stabilization fund. One of those is actually, I think we felt for that particular account we're going to need $150,000 for the distribution this quarter, and that would cover what's going on. So in terms of cash flow, that's where we are on the development and distribution account, formerly known as the custody account. So I'm going to go slowly, so if people have questions, they can jump in any time. The second account that is used basically to pay bills, which has much larger swings, is what we call the contingency account, which is what's being used to pay expenses related to bypass disposal and then to collect tip fees from the municipalities. And here there's a need for working capital because the disposal facilities obviously want their payment as promptly as they can, and the towns pay their tip fees, but not all. But it takes a while to go through the invoicing and payment process, so there's some lag there, and that's where there's some cash flow needed. Again, here we've recommended a transfer of $150,000 from the tip fee fund to the contingency fund because and I guess the other part of it is every time that the disposal fees at the disposal facilities go up a little bit, or if we're a little bit behind, and we'll talk about that as we go forward, because there's one item that merits some consideration by the board. We need working capital to cover the difference between the lead and lag. I think the question is, well, this money is coming out of the tip fee stabilization fund. So if we're looking at another 300,000 in transfers out of it for those purposes, as well as additional support for the operating fund, which Michael can address, then the real question boils down to, do we have enough left in the tip fee stabilization fund? Because that's essentially the deep pocket that's funding the other activities and all the other accounts. And what I typically do at the end of the asset management letter is do a little matrix with all the requirements from the joinder agreement on the left, and then all the resources to satisfy those requirements on the right. And the answer is, we do have the resources for what we're projecting for the next quarter, but we're starting to get a little thin. And I think if you look on page 7 of the asset management letter, typically we look at the 5.17 million roughly in the tip fee stabilization fund, another the 25,977 in the D&D account. So that adds up to roughly $5.2 million in those two accounts. You look at the recommended transfers, what we're reserving for future distributions, we're a little bit over 4.4 million of what I would call discretionary funds, and there is a outstanding requirement suspended for now, but it will kick in at some point, of a 4 million minimum balance. So that there's really about $400,000 and a little more than that in discretionary funds in the tip fee stabilization account, looking forward, accounting for the transfer. So we are fine for this quarter, but the margin is getting thinner. And I think that's the key point. I mean, the other details I can go through if it's necessary. I think what happens if we continue to need cash for another 6, 9, 12 months? Well, at some point, either we go below the 4 million, which we're allowed to do while the interim loan has not been repaid, but raises a number of questions in terms of how that's interpreted in the context of the whole documents, which I don't know if we want to go into that. Or we start spending money from the cash collateral account to which we haven't had access, but still might get access going forward, which is $1.5 million, which is the other investment fund that was mentioned. So that's where we are. For the next quarter, we have the cash and we have the funds available to meet obligations. We start looking 3 to 6 to 9 months. For a number of reasons, it gets more difficult. And so I think that's the high level overview. I don't know if there's specific items you want me to spend more time on, but that's the basic message is this quarter, we're in place to manage the transfers. Going forward, that may get more difficult more and more, or with less market.
So what I take from that, and just because I take it doesn't mean it's accurate, but what I'm taking from that is this idea that we can stay in a holding pattern to wait for the best possible deal is probably not a rational place to be moving forward.
That's very diplomatically stated, so thank you. But yeah, I mean, the balances are being drawn down. The bypass is the major source of that. If there were other sources of spending that cause that drawdown to go more quickly, it would be more problematic. Given where we are, we're fine for next quarter, but 2 to 3 quarters out, we would have much more difficult decisions to make.
So if I could just elaborate on a couple of things on that, just to let you know how we kind of got here is, so I can hold off if you folks want to. I just knew that this was our financial committee meeting. I can hold off on the 150,000. The only reason I'm in the contingency account, the only reason I'm asking for that now is we were expecting a closing at June 30th in funds to be replaced for that bypass. So I'm I'm estimating another closing in what will be needed for there. So that's why that's, and the reason that we're looking at the regular operating account is we did not move some funds that we were gonna move, if you looked, but also, once again, we were expecting a closing where the lease payments would have gotten caught up as of June, and then, lease payments would have continued after that. So the operating fund is short, of course, 6 months of lease payments. And the only reason I'm asking in the other fund is because we did not hit that closing date in June, and I'm just preparing. There is plenty of money available to pay for the waste right now. I just don't know when a closing is going to be and how long we'll have that.
So, I mean, I think one of the things that's important to remember is transferring money doesn't give the permission to expend the funds unless that permission has already been granted. So I think it makes sense to look ahead and plan so we can still pay bills. My frustration is we keep saying there was supposed to be a closing in June. And from MRC's perspective, nothing has changed on the face of the earth, which is what's making this, I think, even more frustrating for me. And when I look, my allegiance is not to this particular deal. I think the board's allegiance needs to be to the membership and looking forward. And as your treasurer, I'm very concerned about where we are financially. And I just wonder if it's time for us to start thinking about other options. That got a lot of response.
Okay.
I would echo that sentiment.
Agreed too.
Bob,
Yeah, I'm concerned like everybody else is. I do have some specific questions, if I may. I've gone through the joinder agreement and looked at attachment B, subparagraph C, which is referred to when we talk about transferring money to Bangor, Brewer, Hampton, and Orono to reimburse them for transportation arrangements. And I'm sorry, I don't read that perhaps the way other people do. Could you please explain to me how we justify those payments and the basis for that? Because I'm looking at attachment B, subparagraph C, I don't see where that allows us to make payments.
so I'll take a first cut just because this is an item I'm really passionate about. But when April 1st of 2018, is that when the contracts ended? Everybody was scrambling because the facility was not ready to accept waste. And there were deals cut to ensure that everybody would be able to put their waste somewhere. And one of the items that MRC representatives at the time put on the table and agreed to was the commercial waste from Bangor, Brewer, Orono, and Hamden would be controlled by Casella. So essentially, they take the waste and they are not following the ordinances in any of those three communities that have flow control and had been getting revenue in the past. When those communities started to express our concern that a deal had been made that violated our ordinances and without our permission, what I was told at least was that I needed to go along for the greater good because it was the only way the rest of the membership could get the deal to for the waste swap. And we all kind of we understand that being part of a bigger organization means sometimes you have to do something for the greater good. However, there was a financial impact to all four of those communities because we bill through and receive revenue for every ton of commercial waste that is disposed of. That waste was taken out of our waste stream. We came back and I may have screamed at the board. I tried to be diplomatic. But it was one thing to get in the middle of our local affairs, and it was quite another thing to take money out of our pocket. And I don't know that MRC needs to continue to reimburse the towns, but if we're not getting reimbursed, the towns are gonna go after Casella, which is then gonna upset the entire arrangement. So I guess that's how we got to reimburse the communities and let them continue to take it on the chin for a little bit.
And I want to add that, and maybe you already said this, Sophie, and you did a good job of summarizing that, but the whole flow control and the volume of waste that came from these communities that would be theoretically the commercial waste was calculated into the bottom line deal for Fiberite. So they needed that waste to make the plant viable. And we wrote ordinances to guarantee them waste that otherwise could have gone off the commercial market other places. So I feel like the waste that we committed now, when I saw what Craig Stewart Paul did, and I don't really understand it all, it did appear that he double counted our waste. He bought our waste or sold it twice or however he worked it out. But that waste was essential to the volume necessary to operate the plant more efficiently.
Well, I do understand the argument. I'm wondering if it's time to have another look at it. I mean, I think we spent close to $250,000, $220,000 for this particular line item. It adds up, and given our current less optimistic, less rosy cash flow prospects, I'm wondering if Mike might have some suggestions or might have a look at this to see whether or not we can modify the arrangement or do something to put less pressure on all of us and the four communities in particular to perhaps make it a more rational and workable solution. That's just one suggestion. And I had some other issues, but I don't want to monopolize the floor, so I'll hold back until some others have had their say.
So Bob, to answer your question, it is something that I have looked at, but it's the communities. The four communities are really, I'm there to assist in any way that I can with this. But they're the ones really working together to ensure that their commercial waste is that they're getting the weights and the credits on their commercial waste. And then they come to me for any information or anything that I can do for them. Correct, Sophie?
Yes, Tony?
I'd like to go back to what Sophie said about looking at other options, and the other directors all agreed. Is there something out there I don't know?
So I'm gonna suggest,
Can't hear you.
Sophie, you're muted. There you go.
so I'm gonna suggest that this is not the forum for that discussion, but that MRC is known for creativity and forward planning. So I'm gonna guess that there's gotta be some option out there.
I'll accept that for now, thanks.
Any other questions for George?
If I may, George, you've kind of indicated that the next 3 or 4 quarters are going to be okay, but not great. We continue to hemorrhage cash because we're paying more to dispose of solid waste than we are receiving in revenues to support the outflow. And we know that's because we're having to divert, which goes back to Sophie's point. It's not a sustainable solution for us at this point. And I just kind of reinforces the idea that we have to begin to think of other options. And I agree with Sophie, this isn't the forum to have that discussion. I do look at the auditor's report, and I was a little discouraged that, and I want to quote quickly from the letter they wrote to us.
Yeah, just if I can stop you before, what you're reading is not from the auditor,
Sorry, it's from the accounting. Yeah, I agree.
which did not, but I'm glad you raised that, because when I saw this yesterday, let's just say I was less than pleased, because management puts together a management disclosure and an analysis every year. And then it is built on the disclosures that are made in the quarterly asset management reports, which are all online. So all of those materials are open to the public. And then we summarize them and put them in the audit materials. So the audit materials have been sent to the auditor, and there was all the disclosures in the statement of cash flows required by accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America were provided to the auditor. Okay, for whatever reason, those disclosures did not make their way to the bookkeeper who put together this letter.
So I will just say this letter, most of the time when I'm not in vacation mode, I get this letter and I remove it from the financial statements that you guys receive. We have been getting this letter since we went with the bookkeeper, and it's more about, because I questioned it the first time I received it. This bookkeeper does public auditing. We are not paying them to do that work because we already have an independent auditor. They are simply doing bookkeeping efforts. And what this letter says is we only do bookkeeping, if you boil it down.
Right. So right. So I didn't want to cut you off, but before but you deserve the explanation, because I saw it and
I thank you for that. I fully understand.
yeah, it's like, what? Oh, and then, you look at the other letterhead and realize, and then we put together the chain of events that this is in fact a piece of good news. Sophie actually took some vacation, is that rather than taken literally, which misses the activities on the audit that are going forth as they always do, and the public disclosures, which are on the website, provided to the auditor as they always have been. And so, it might be a little confusing, and I was confused as well, but sometimes confusion happens and we need to explain it.
George, I think that's the first time in a decade I've confused you.
Yes, Tony.
If the letter only says we only do bookkeeping, what's the issue with the letter?
There's no issue with the letter, except that if you take it out of context and you hadn't seen it before, you would think it was saying that we weren't running our books the right way. And it's not. It's simply saying we don't hire them for that work.
Thank you.
And just so everybody's aware, is I have requested an audit, which will put us back on a calendar year after this audit. And they've received all the information over at Haverlock and Estes. So we have asked for our other audit. And Tony, just to touch base on when we go into our regular meetings, so much has happened over the last week. So it's not that information has been flying. It's actually a lot of my update that I'll be given in the next meeting will pretty much put everybody up to date and on the same page. And I think a lot more of your questions will be answered at that time.
Could I ask one more without creating too much kerfuffle here? Sorry.
Just one, Bob, just one.
Sure.
If I'm reading the numbers the accountant provided correctly, it seems as though part of the cash flow issue is related to the fact that municipalities aren't paying their dues promptly. Am I understanding that correctly, or am I missing the boat on that?
Minimal. I mean, once they're minimal amounts. I mean, once sometimes they slip through the cracks and all we do is send them an overdue invoice. It's not enough to make, I mean, we usually have 100% on our collections on that. I mean, we have a couple of slow paying on the waste, which Tony has worked with me. There's one account. I mean, when you look at our 90-day column on the waste, there's one of our members is at $7,000, which we're working with to try to get payments in. But I mean, usually it's just a slip through the cracks and I don't want to say sometimes I'm not the best on collections, but I usually catch up to them every 60 days. And all I do is send them an overdue invoice and we usually have the check right away.
But what you're seeing is the accounts receivable, which we send out the invoice, it's not an aged receivable, it is the receivable. So I just put our dues through like last week, and I do that as soon as I open the bill. So part of it is a timing issue, Bob, and I think you'll see
Yes.
it times about the same with every meeting.
I was actually looking at the budget versus actual numbers. And again, your point is taken, Sophie, so you've answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, we usually get 100% very quickly on the dues, Bob. I mean, and I'm sorry, Sophie, my agent's different. I get an aging every month that has my 30, 60 and 90-day column, and I focus on 60 and 90. But our members are very good about, as long as they get those overdues and they hear from me every now and then, we're very good about collections.
Very cool. George, you have a. the floor.
Just as if life isn't complicated enough, some of our smaller members typically pay the dues payment along with their tip fee payment.
Yes.
And then that becomes a burden both on the accounting system to figure out which receivable has been satisfied and since the two numbers are supposed to go into different accounts, but if you get one check, you got to put it in and move it. So there's another overlay of, I'll call it fuzziness, just because of managing that particular set of interactions. And sometimes it looks like you have a payable and in fact it was paid on the other account and you just got to move it. So that by the end of the day, we're in pretty good shape. It's just, looking at the raw numbers can sometimes, provide a message that's not as clear as we wish it would.
We keep a running spreadsheet of money that needs to be transferred internally from when due payments get with waste payments. And I just, rather than bother Sophie every time something happens, I let it go for a while, then she'll do the I'll request a transfer and I'll show her the reasons why. And right now that's about $10,000 or $15,000 of dues that need to be moved over because they've been made with the waste payments.
So I think we've got a good answer for Bob on that.
You do. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before we move on? No? All right. So if we look at the financial reports, I actually put in two different types of reports. We've got the one that came from the bookkeeper, which is what Bob has been referencing, where we look, this shows the true agency kind of wide financial picture, which I think it honestly looks quite similar to what it looks like every quarter. The one that I have really been focused on is Mike takes the proposed budget and then breaks down every month what our actual expenditures to budget are. He does a really nice job with that. So I put that in your report to make sure that you saw it. We're at 63% of budget, but that includes some of this effort to secure coastal resources, which has come down, which is nice to see. The monthly expenses have reduced and will continue to reduce or go to zero, correct?
Yes, and also some of that 60 reflects the insurance premiums that we've made up front for the whole year.
The place that I would draw your attention to is our bookkeeping services. We budget about $8,000 a year. We're at almost 90% expended, and that is because they have taken on the billing piece that they have never done, they had never done before, so it's a lot more time. We probably, when we meet next time, are gonna wanna look at transferring just a budget adjustment, maybe from contingency to cover that cost so that we can move forward there. The other place I would draw your attention is in our legal services special line. We are 88% expended there. Mike has done a really good job of separating the expenses that we would line up for reimbursement should this deal go through versus the expenses that would hit the budget. But given where we are, I think we would expect that line to also move forward. So my request of our fearless leader is that when we come back together next quarter, we look at some budget adjustments so that we can stay on track and understand what we're spending of this budget. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Questions about the budget that Mike put together or that we got from the bookkeeper?
Now, just to say Mike's doing a great job. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And I'm just gonna sum up George's words again. We're getting thin. We're fine, but we're headed to thin. So on that note, let's talk about the bills that need to get paid.
Has
You
George
have-
been on vacation? 13%?
George, some of George's work is going towards the other.
Gotcha. Yep.
The other line, but George also bills us for most of the work he does and does not give us bills if there is not stuff that has to be done. And that's one of the reasons we enjoy him. And I think he knows we're thin.
I think this is a good time to sneak in that George went and represented the MRC at Waste Expo in Las Vegas. And when I received his bill, I questioned why I don't see any charges for that. And we were not charged for him to go there and do that. So I thank George for doing that, but I think you all should know that.
And Mike, much appreciated. I'm just grateful for the opportunity. Obviously, anytime I go to a national conference and have a speaker on a national panel, that's of substantial value to our company. And, we're happy to, do our part in contributing to that opportunity. So,
George, did you hit the slots?
actually, I am not a gambler, and I did not. I have been the only person in Las Vegas who did not spend a single penny on gambling.
If I had been with you, we wouldn't have spent any money either.
So, Las Vegas is a lovely place for many people. It's just not my personal preference.
Well, thanks for representing us.
And
Thank you, George.
and maybe I'll do this if there's time in the general agenda, but it was an opportunity also to be in a panel with other owner operators of mixed waste processing facilities on the East Coast in West Virginia, South Carolina, and Alabama, and as well, and to stay in touch with other things that are going on in that particular sector of the market. So we can talk about later when it's more appropriate to address that subject. But
Nice.
there is information to bring back that's useful. So
There was a little part of me, George, on my last meeting, hoping that there was just a little bit of a wild man under that trash nerd.
well, if there was, it stays in Vegas.
Funny. All right, not to pull us all back to the mundane payables, but there is on page 21 of your packet a list of payables. When I looked at this, there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. It totals $21,078.10 when you add in the automatically paid Verizon wireless payment. Once again, Mike laid it out color coded and everything for us. But didn't know if you had any questions about the payables. No. Okay.
I can't let it go. I have to ask a question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We have a credit from DTE. It's under the Eaton Peabody?
Yeah, so I'll let Mike explain.
Yes, so DET, there's staff at the plant that are 1099 contractors that we have always more or less done the check run for either bondholder trustee or DTE. It's their responsibility to pay these folks. So what happens is they get paid weekly. We will run a check down. They will give us their invoices, and those invoices are usually made out to Coastal Resources. And one of those two parties have always reimbursed us and paid them. DTE has either switched accounts or something was happening with their accounts, so they needed to put that expense on their credit card for a while. And where I am capable of taking a credit card, I had to use Eaton and Peabody and then put it on a credit on our account that we use towards when we pay our invoices with them. So MRC has been made whole, and they no longer do the check run or the temporary funding of this labor. And we have been made whole on it, but to get whole, we had to finagle a couple things, and that's one of the ways that we did it.
Thank you.
So I'll move, do you need a motion on the payables? No? Okay.
I saw nodding heads, but I'm going to report that the finance committee is recommending that we pay the bills.
Yeah.
And that we accept the financial statements.
Yeah.
And that when somebody here is going to accept the asset management letter. So I think we're good. Anything else that people want to talk about today in finance, or would you like a 15-minute break before our board meeting? Okay.
The latter.
So before we leave, as the finance committee chair, I just want to recognize the incredible work that Kathy Conlow has done on the finance committee since her tenure on the board. And it's just not going to be the same without you, especially when you try to make me look diplomatic. So you will be missed.
Thanks, you guys. You guys have done a phenomenal job, and I feel bad abandoning you with still so much work to be done, but you're in great hands.
No, you don't.
All right, on that note, I am going to declare us done, and Karen will see you all back here at 10 a.m.
Remember,
Sophie.
if you don't log off, this is probably going to stay open and it's live. So if you don't log off, please remember to at least mute, okay, board meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pause the recording right now and pause the live on Facebook too.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Morning, John.
Good morning.
Hi, Sean. All right, well, I have 10 o'clock. Hopefully our board members will reappear. Hi, Dana. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, well, we have a quorum present, so I will go ahead and call this meeting to order, and hopefully the rest of our board will be able to join us shortly. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to MRC's regular quarterly board meeting. Appreciate you all being here in attendance today. Along with our board members here, we have our Executive Director, Mike Carroll, Technical Consultant, George Aronson, a couple members from our legal team of Eaton Peabody, including John Pottle and Sean Doyle, as well as assistance for note-taking from Joelle. The first item on our agenda this morning is approval of the agenda. Do I have any comments or questions or concerns about the agenda items as they're presented? All right, well, we'll consider it accepted and approved. I would like to let folks know in the audience that we do have public comment on the agenda today. It is going to be, however, after our business items before we're scheduled to go into an executive session. So just want to let you know that it's there. You can submit questions through the, I believe we have the Q&A feature here, or we'll be asking for you to raise your hands if you have any comments. But I did want to remind folks that we do have scheduled next week a town hall meeting where we'll be providing a more full and complete update on status of the plans to reopen the plant. And our folks from DTE will be there and presenting at that time on their progress that they're making. That is scheduled for Thursday, August 5th. I believe it's starting at 10 a.m. And
11.
there's information, or 11. There's information on the MRC's website about that, and you can log in and register for that event, which will be virtual town meeting. Sorry about that. It is 11 a.m. You're right, on August 5th. Okay. Next item on our agenda this morning, consideration of the minutes of the special meeting of April 21st, 2021, and the quarterly meeting of April 28th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve those minutes. Do we have any comments or corrections that need to be made? Tony?
Is there any chance we could have the word minutes put in the title block of the documents? Doesn't make mention to minutes until it doesn't say they're minutes.
Oh, in the actual,
At the top of the first page,
I
yeah.
see. Mhm.
This is after 9 or 10 years of looking at them. Maybe it's the aging factor, but nothing major.
Okay, well, we could take that under advisement there, minutes of the executive session, and likewise minutes of the Municipal Review Committee Board of Directors. That sounds good to me. Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we'll do a vote by roll call. John, are you available for that?
Yes. Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kathy, Sophie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes,
Kevin,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
and Karen.
Yes. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is a report from our Executive Director, Mike Carroll.
Thank you, Karen. I'll start with a brief update on where things are at with the Hampden facility, but we will go into much more detail on that next week at the MRC members virtual town hall meeting scheduled Thursday, August 5th at 11 a.m. Members will hear directly from Mr. Rob Van Naarden, CEO of Delta Thermal Energy, at the meeting, updating everyone on the status of the Hampden facility. Let's get started. Vendors have been in and out of the facility with proposals to bring back rolling equipment such as loaders and skid steers. Over 100 letters have been sent out to past coastal resource vendors stating the buyer will be contacting them to review what is owed and discuss future services. Software providers have been on site and are working with DTE operations. DTE Operations Vice President Zane Crowley has been on the Hampden site for about 2 months now, speaking with vendors and reviewing the current operation while working on improvement and efficiency plans. Mr. Crowley's plans are to reside in Maine once the deal is complete. All three parties, bondholders, trustee, and DTE, and the MRC have finalized negotiations. The documents required for this size transaction were massive undertaken to ensure everything was covered. All additional documents such as assigned contracts and amendments were attached to the new agreement. The MRC's firm negotiations still remain in the documents among many other protections MRC has negotiated, such as, but not limited to, DTE posting a performance bond, MRC approval of DTE's operating plan, monthly stakeholders meetings to report their progress, must have local management on the ground running the facility, principal and interest of the MRC loan provided to Coastal get reimbursed, MRC's cost due to Coastal defaults, our transaction cost and additional bypass costs also being reimbursed in full. After the final language in the sales agreements had been agreed upon, fundamental notices were sent out to members on May 3rd, making members aware of the fundamental matters and giving members until June 2nd to respond to them. MRC only received one official request for a members meeting regarding the fundamentals matters. Because that single request fell far short of the required 60,000 ton criteria as stated in the MRC bylaws, section 4-2, no members meeting was scheduled. However, MRC did attend that members' regular council meeting and answered any concerns that they had. Now that the deadline is passed on the notices, all final documents are with DTE financiers. We are currently waiting on DTE financiers' approval and term sheet. Presently, we are aware that DTE is discussing financings with their source, but no term sheet has been finalized or presented to the trustee or the MRC. DTE has discussed in detail with the MRC and the trustee some of the issues DTE says they are facing, which they believe can be overcome to secure financing. DTE also represented it as speaking with one of these financing sources further this week, and they are optimistic for a positive outcome. As I mentioned earlier, we expect a full update on this from DTE next week at the town hall meeting. Once financing is secured and approved, all parties involved will sign off, and then the court will appoint a receiver to be boots on the ground and execute the Hamden facility sale. This week, MRC and trustees have continued our efforts to push DTE to resolve any financing hurdles so that we can move forward on the sale of the Hamden facility. This has included multiple calls directly with Mr. Van Narding and James, DTE's lead financing. This process is prolonging much longer than we want, and we are looking forward to a DTE update next week. I know this has been a long process for everyone, and we do thank you for your patience. Please remember that the MRC is not selling the plant, but has been invited to the table due to our position. All negotiations by MRC with the bondholders in DTE have been to make sure that it looks out for our members' best interest. MRC is playing the hand they are dealt, and recent media stories we have seen over the last couple of months seem to lack context and look at individual points in a vacuum while ignoring the important here and now facts. In regular MRC business, quarterly meeting tonnages. Members total MSW tons for second quarter of 2021 were 28,608 tons, including the commercial waste estimated at 5,875 tons. Last year's members total for second quarter in 2020 was 25,789 tons, which also includes the estimated commercial waste, an increase year over year of 2,819 tons. Bypass notices our members have seen recently. Some of our members have seen recently. We have had to send several secondary bypass notices over the last few months to bypass MRC's MSW from PERC. By no lack of effort on their part, PERC had done everything they could to take members' waste when they could, even if they were not processing it or making power. Versant Power had regular maintenance scheduled from April 5th to April 25th on the main vault line going into PERC. This would cause PERC to have to stop processing waste while Versant performed their maintenance. PERC took the opportunity to schedule some of their own maintenance during that downtime, which proved to be much more complicated than anticipated. Due to a significant component needed more overhaul work than anticipated, PERC could not return to normal operations when versions maintenance was completed on April 25th. The excess inventory issue by not being able to process waste was causing concerns for the facility's safe operation and extended wait times for delivery vehicles, leading to bypass notices. Due to the pandemic and lack of supply, surplus parts inventory, PERC has just recently received everything needed and plans on being fully back online servicing MRC waste again next week, starting August 2nd. Communications update. At the Waste Expo. Waste Expo is North America's largest waste and recycling trade show, which nearly 600 exhibitors attend and 13,000 attendees. Longtime MRC consultant George Aronson spoke at this year's Waste Expo 2021 conference on June 20th on the What's New with Mixed Waste panel. He brought national attention to the Hamden facility and outlined how and why we are at the stage we are at. The PowerPoint presentation is available on the MRC website under the document library. Please have a look if you have time. It's an excellent presentation. Thank you, George, and as always, great job. Legislative news. Plastic bag ban is in effect as of July 1st, 2021. Main retailers are no longer allowed to give out single-use plastic or foam disposable food containers in most cases. Retailers are required to charge consumers a minimum of a nickel per bag if requested. Also, Governor signed LT 1541, which amends into law on July 12th, which was amended on July 12th. LT 1541 is the bill to bring back an extended producer responsibility, EPR, of packaging program to Maine. The law intends to encourage producers to use more recycling material by charging packaging producers for the cost of disposal of non-recyclable packaging material. While the bill is now law, there are many aspects of actual implementation that remain unknown, as DEP is now responsible for setting up entirely new program under their jurisdiction. Last-minute amendments to the bill move the timeline for DEP to take action to fiscal year 2022 through 2023. DEP now has to begin the rulemaking process by December of 2023. MRC will closely follow the rulemaking process at the Maine DEP and comment on how the law will impact the Hamden facility operations. I will also be posting more detail of this new law on the MRC website to include a link so members can learn more on this new law at their convenience. That wraps it up for me. I want to thank everyone for listening and also for your patience in this whole process. I also want to thank Jeff McGowan at Waste Management Crossroads Facility for allowing MRC to use alternate facilities. I want to thank PERC for accepting a portion of the MRC members' waste, and also a big thank you to the town of Hamden and the city of Bangor Wastewater for working with us while this process is going on, and thank them for their patience. Finally, just a quick reminder, we'll be taking questions near the end of the meeting through the Q&A feature. But remember, next week at the town hall, Mr. Rob Van Naarden, CEO of Delta Thermo, will be addressing members directly and taking their questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. And thanks again to George for representing MRC so well out in Las Vegas for us. George, you're up next with your asset management report.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, the report was in the packet, so just looking at the report very quickly, I think there are three. I'll start just by saying there are 3 or 4 recommendations as part of the report to make the quarterly distribution to the joining members of 151,651.68, which is again stemming from the exhibit to the joint agreement related to distributions over the first 36 months since November 1st. 2019. So we're moving forward with that. The transfer $150,000 from the Target Valley Reserve Fund held within the TIFI account to the development and distribution account in order to make the funds available to make the distribution. The transfer $150,000 from the TIF stabilization account to the contingency account. And this is to be cash flow needs in the upcoming quarter related with disposal. Unfortunately, and I know we're all growing impatient, but the bypass situation continues. And that means that the MRC is paying disposal facilities in advance of receiving tip fees from members, which means that there's an ongoing need for working capital. When we go into the summer months, the waste quantities go up, which means that the disposal costs go up and there's a little bit more of a cash flow lag. So we need a little bit more working capital, and the transfer is intended to address that. And finally, a transfer of $125,000 from the TIF stabilization fund to the operating fund to support administrative costs we'll be discussing later on, but it is noted as part of this of the asset management report. A few notes. You go through the balance sheet, the development and distribution account, which is the account through which money flows to pay the distributions, had a balance of $25,977.36. All these balances will be as of the close of business on June 30th, 2021. We've noted in the balance sheet receivables prior MSW delivered from joining members for the tip fees. The tip fees stabilization account balance, which was overall a total of 5.168,247.10, which includes both the market value of the investments and some an amount of accrued interest, which we show separately since it's actually a non-cash item. The contingency account, which is 335,570.69. The cash collateral agency account balance, which is again held in reserve, which is 1,527,654.75. We note the loan principal, which we're still carrying on the balance sheet in anticipation of repayment should there be a closing in the next quarter. We'll be talking about that going forward. And the site owned by the MRC with improvements for development of the facility, which has a book value of $6,214,505.22 on the basis of past expenditures. The balance sheet also shows distributions payables and a few adjustments for various cash flows and lags that are described in the report. I think the big picture here is that, and this is shown in the balance sheet, is that yes, the delays have cost the MRC money. We're set, and we're looking quarter by quarter. We're certainly set for next quarter without violating any of the covenants that were made in the joinder agreements. But it has been an ongoing cost to cover bypass costs to the extent that they are in excess of the tip fee charged to municipalities. There are extra administrative costs associated with the delays in reaching a closing, and I think we're all aware of those costs. Frankly, no one's happy about them, but the MRC is in a position to continue to provide the services, notwithstanding the cash losses, which is frankly why we've had reserves and that the MRC has been preparing for to manage for some time. I think the asset management letter also sets out the distribution payments that will be made to each of the individual communities. So at that point, I think I'm just going to stop it here and take questions. The recommendations are the 4 transfers I mentioned at the stop. It is within the environment that we know that there's been a negative cash flow in the past quarter, and we are anticipating and looking forward to hoping to having that resolved when there's a closing moving forward. So questions?
Thank you, George. Are there any questions or comments from the board about George's report? I would like to just reinforce your comment, George, about the fact that of these costs that we've been incurring in this interim period for bypass and administrative fees and whatnot, we're anticipating being repaid at the closing. So we're very anxious to achieve that that goal. All right, if there's no questions or comments for George, I would entertain a motion to move his recommendations.
So moved.
Second,
A motion and a second to accept and move on the 4 recommendations made in our technical consultants asset management report. John, will you call the roll?
Yes, happy to do so. Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kathy,
yes.
Kevin. Yes. Melissa,
Yes.
Sophie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes,
and Karen.
Yes. And thanks again, George, for keeping us on the straight and narrow. That was a lot of information that you always cover. And for the folks in the audience, these asset management reports are available on the MRC website on the documents section. I encourage you to look at them if you're interested in getting into the weeds. All right, next up, we have the treasurer's report. Sophie.
So the finance committee met earlier this morning. As always, it was a rousing discussion with lots of interesting points. I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but we did have a review of our investments with our advisors from the First Wealth Management. We also reviewed the financial statements, and I am once again going to echo George saying we are fine right now, but if we continue in this path, we are going to see ourselves get very thin or begin to get thin financially. I don't think anybody wants to be in that position. We reviewed the financial statements that were in the packet and also on the packet online if people want to look there. The payables, for the payables this quarter, of course, I've lost my sheet. We have $21,078.10 of June payables. All of them are part of our standard operating process. There isn't anything that stood out. The committee recommended approval of the financial statements and bills payable.
Thanks, Sophie. Any questions for Sophie? Seeing none, I will accept a motion to approve the bills payable.
so moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. John, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Sophie.
Yes.
Tony,
Yes,
and Karen.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Moving on, we have a review of the extension letter regarding integral capabilities for performance test protocol. This has been an item that we've revisited, I think, at every regular board meeting. John, are you going to give us a little overview as to what's happening here?
Sure, I can give a brief overview. So as you mentioned, Karen, this has been a reoccurring item. In recent past at the board's quarterly meeting, we've kept this as a business item for consideration to continue to extend the time frame to achieve these integral capabilities. This harkens back to the performance test protocol that was passed by Coastal, but there were certain conditions that related to the integral capabilities, as we call them, to the facility. So the recommendation is to continue with another additional extension. If the board is in keeping with past practice, we would include this, if necessary, as an agenda item at the next quarterly meeting. And I believe that's October 27th. And we've always given a few days leeway. So I guess the recommendation from my perspective is that the board consider authorizing an additional extension, authorizing the executive director to execute and deliver an additional extension of the extension letter regarding the integral capabilities to October 29th, 2021.
All right, thanks, John. Does anybody have any questions about the matter at hand or the recommendation?
Can what? I'm a little bit concerned of the message that gets sent when we extend for that length of time. I feel like we've been in this holding pattern for a very long time. And when we keep kicking things out to that degree, I realize it makes less work for our already incredibly burdened executive director and president, but I am not sure that the rest of the world feels the same degree of impatience that I am feeling now. And there, I guess I'll just leave it there.
Tony?
I'm not impatient, but I'm looking forward to the end, and I don't have a problem with extending this, as John described, to the end of October.
If it's helpful for some further context, it's assuming that we get to the closing prior to end of October, it's very possible, perhaps likely, that itself will overtake the integral capabilities issue that we've been extending throughout. So again, one of the principal fundamental reasons for continuing to extend it is that if it's not extended, it can potentially trigger automatic termination of some key agreements. So the idea was to keep that extension in play. We have always included in the extension at MRC's discretion to terminate that before the extension date. And we put a time frame, I believe it's 10 business days, but it's about 2 weeks. So if for some reason there was a need or a desire to cut short the extension period, we would be in a position to do so if that was advisable. But if it's the pleasure of the board, we could have a different date. Just recognize we'd be conscious of that and perhaps a need to meet within that time frame.
Tony?
If you're looking for a motion, I would make a motion we extend to October 29th, 2021, as described by John.
I'll second that motion and add as part of the discussion that I think everybody's frustrated with this process, the way it's lingered. And I think we're sending a message with this discussion, and there will be other ways to send a message that will be more to our interests as we go down the road. So I second the motion.
Thank you, Bob. Any other thoughts or comments from the board? Yeah, I echo the feelings of frustration. I'm not sure changing the extension date is the tool that will be most effective to deal with that. So I'm hoping we can come up with some more compelling tools. Yes, Sophie?
So I'm not wedded to the date, but what I am wedded to is more of a discussion, so that it doesn't feel like we are just kicking the can down the road. I think we've dealt with some people that, for whatever reason, don't necessarily read not even the fine print in agreements, but the language of agreements. And I think it was very important for us to make it clear in this action that even if it extends, this is not MRC saying, whoa, we're just going to keep kicking this can, you keep playing the games you want to play. And so that's where I am.
Yeah.
Tony?
I agree with what Sophie just said, and Bob, I think, summed it up, that this discussion here sends a pretty straightforward message. Let's get this thing done.
Thank you. All right, with the motion in a second, John, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes,
Kevin.
Yes.
Melissa. Nope, you're on mute, Melissa.
yes,
Sophie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes,
Karen.
Yes. And with that, the extension's been created till October 29th. All right. Next up is item 8 on the agenda is consideration of a remote meeting policy for MRC board meetings. As folks may be aware, the state law has now changed effective July 30th, I believe. If you want to continue meeting remotely, you need to adopt a policy. So we have a policy in front of us that we will be considering. And this is an opportunity for us to discuss our feelings about remaining virtual or going back to meeting in person. And I don't know, John, if you have any other thoughts or comments you wanted to add as we enter into this discussion about how the state law might apply to MRC as a, whatever we are, non-governmental entity.
Yeah, just to provide some more detail. So MRC, which as everyone knows, the membership of is made up of municipalities and quasi-municipal entities. Under the Maine Freedom of Access Act, when you have an organization that is essentially made up of public entities that themselves are subject to the Freedom of Access Act, that entity itself then becomes subject to it. So that relates to both public records as well as public proceedings meaning meetings. So as everyone is aware, with the pandemic, there was emergency provisions put in place in conjunction with the governor's emergency proclamation that allowed everyone to do basically remote meetings, virtual meetings, Zoom or some other device or method. More recently, with the governor's emergency proclamation ending, there was, as Karen mentioned, more recent legislation that authorizes remote participation by a body or members, but subject to certain criteria or conditions. And Karen is correct, August 1st is the kind of a pivot date. So absent a policy, the expectation or requirement, quite frankly, is in-person meetings. If a body or members want the ability to participate remotely, consistent with the Maine Freedom of Access Act, they would need to adopt a policy. The statutory criteria for that policy is if there is, I'll use a phrase like an emergency or some urgent issue where the whole body, it's just not practical. That's the key term, whether it's practical or not, can't meet in person, then the whole body can meet by remote means. In a separate category, if there are reasons why a member or members may not be able to attend in person for a meeting, it's just not practical, then they can participate remotely. Combined with all of that are provisions, as we've been essentially following all along anyway, to ensure that the public is able to attend, have notice of the meetings, materials available, et cetera. So a lot of that is what we've kind of been doing all along. The one thing that the statute says it has, the expectation is that members will be there in person unless it's just not practicable. So that's kind of the test or the standard. But again, to even be able to do that, participate remotely, you would first have to adopt a policy that is consistent with the statute. So I guess a suggested action or consideration today is to have a draft policy that's been presented in the packet. If the board desires to have the ability and opportunity to have remote participation, then you would want to adopt the policy there's any changes to the policy, we can add those edits. But that's the matter that is before the board. And again, timing is everything, where August 1st is not very far away. If the policy was adopted today, it would be in place for a meeting post August 1st. If it's not, then there would not be a policy in place post August 1st.
Okay, thank you, John. Tony, you have a question or
I'm
comment?
assuming, John, this might sound like a foolish question, but this policy we're looking at is consistent with the state law.
That, yes, my opinion is it is. The one thing that, there's been some policies floating around, like model policies. I've seen those in other areas. I tailored one to MRC. What's a little bit different for MRC, in my view, is versus a single municipality, for example, is you do have this, statewide membership. It's not just in one jurisdiction, it's many jurisdictions. So that actually provides a potential reason, if you will, where a member of members can justify remote participation just because of the significant travel distance that can sometimes occur.
Sophie?
So I'm having a hard time squaring how the MRC has had in its bylaws that we can meet through teleconference and take votes that way for the entirety of my term on the MRC. We had a lawyer draft that and tell us that there is some nuance. So how do we go from being able to do that before we ever got to a pandemic, when public bodies were not allowed to function that way? And now we have to follow the letter of this new statute, number one. And maybe I can stop there. I have a few questions and some concerns about the policy.
No, I mean, opinions can vary, I would say, but I would say, the Municipal Review Committee is also as you know, it's a nonprofit corporation, and there's a separate title in the main statutes that details what those requirements are. I would say the bylaws of MRC is consistent with that. Those statutes contemplate that bylaws can specify, how folks can participate in remote fashion. My view would be, I don't think that supersedes the Freedom of Access Act and those requirements as it may apply to MRC. So I think you have to look at both requirements as an organization and focus on that. So I think my understanding is for the board meetings, the practice has always been to have open meetings, public proceedings that are noticed. I think that's been continuously done. I can't speak to all the historic committee meetings that have occurred over the past, but my recommendation is that the board, to the extent it has to, comply with the Freedom of Access Act, as well as the main nonprofit organizational statutes.
Tony?
You're muted, Tony.
Yep. Always. John, the second paragraph on the second page, if one board member is participating remotely, that means the public is allowed to participate remotely as well.
Correct.
Okay, so one absence participating remotely by a board director triggers that. The public can do like we're doing today. Thank you.
Correct.
Sophie, did you have other questions or concerns that you wanted to raise?
So when you say outside the MRC jurisdiction, travel outside the MRC jurisdiction could be problematic, I will tell you, there will be times that I might be within the MRC jurisdiction and travel could be problematic. From my perspective as a board member, the remote meetings have given us an opportunity to streamline what we're doing a little bit, and day-long meetings have turned into 2.5 hour long meetings. The idea of me traveling, I won't. If suddenly Bob decided he was gonna host the meetings, I'm not gonna give up a day out of the office for a 2-hour long meeting. And so I would hope that we could soften that just a little bit, because there will be times that my work schedule, it just doesn't make it practical for me to travel. With the Town of Orono's ordinance, our policy that we just adopted to be compliant, we made sure that the quorum didn't matter, but that the person who was facilitating the meeting was live in person with where you give the public the opportunity to be. So we could technically have, for example, the meeting set up at the MRC office and other people zooming in. I just think you need to loosen up a little bit on what's practical. That's all.
Karen?
Thanks, Sophie. Tony?
I think, Sophie, I think we all face the travel issue sometimes. Ralph came down from Millinocket. That cost him 3 hours a day when we're meeting up in Ellsworth. But I guess that's a personal call on the particular director if they want to do the traveling. But how about we have a meeting scheduled and we get a blizzard? We can still have the meeting if I don't see any weather concerns in here, which in Maine is a true concern. We've had to postpone because of weather before. And if we can participate like this, then we should not have too many canceled, postponed meetings.
What does the law say about that, John?
You know, what I would say is this, I would consider Tony's example to fall into the not practicable category. The policy that provided some examples is not meant to be an exhaustive list, just examples. So the policy is contemplating that there may be other circumstances that may not be listed or fall into a category here that nonetheless would meet that not practicable standard. And the only other, and I'm happy to add weather conditions if that would be the board pleasure, if they do end up adopting the policy. I think that's perfectly fine to add. The only other comment I just wanted to mention is I understand exactly what Sophie was saying, because MRC's jurisdiction itself is actually quite large. But I think because of that, I consider like a statewide membership, even if you're in the jurisdiction, because of significant travel that may be required to go to a meeting, I would consider that, barring some details in a specific situation, to not be practicable as well. So I think there's a variety of reasons that would justify the remote participation. It's hard to anticipate every single case, but I think that's why the way the policy is set up is that if a member, or if that's what happens, contact Mike, the executive director, explain the situation. It's justified. We make sure we have the meeting set up as we need to allow remote participation.
Bob?
I love meeting in person. I hate this, what we're doing now. And I think it increases social contacts among us when we're able to get together personally. So my hope is that effective August 1st, we won't be doing this anymore. And I would like to see a policy that allows a member, for whatever reason, I don't think they have to have a reason, to request remote participation if they receive the approval of the chairperson. And the reason they give is a reasonably sensible reason. When you sign up for this, you expect to travel. I mean, I expected to travel when I signed up for this, and I look forward to it. So I just think we can make it more simple than we have.
Sophie?
I would absolutely hate to see us stop the remote. I get what Bob's saying. I think we should come together perhaps as we need to, but I think for our membership, expecting a member to drive all the way to Orono Bangor Brewer for a 2-hour meeting for an item on an agenda is that is not member friendly. And so I would hope, and I think Mike is set up at the Upstart Center for like with the owl and the ability to have a nice Zoom experience, even if we were all sitting around the table for the rest of the world, correct, Mike?
Yes, I
Yeah.
mean, that was one of the options was that we could try to meet here and do it remotely and in person, like mix the both with whatever best accommodation for everybody. Kathy, you've had up quite a bit there.
So I
Kathy?
just want to say, I think, at least the guidance that we've gotten at the city of Bangor is consistent with what John has said. And I understand the immense disappointment that went across the state over the fact that we couldn't use remote meetings the way we had in the past. And there are good and bad reasons for it. The only suggestion I would have is perhaps tie it more closely to state law. I suspect that a number of municipalities at some point will lobby for broader, and then we just at least tie it to changing state laws. But I think Bob's right. We signed up knowing that we were going to travel across a region. I think it's a drag, but I think the lesson we got out of this really was we can do these meetings in 2 hours. We don't need to do all the, and I'm with Sophie on that, man. The meetings that went from 8 a.m. till 3 p.m, we should never go back. We can brown bag a lunch and we can do what we need to do, but we need to tighten it up. And we showed that we could. So I'm there.
Thanks, Kathy. Bob? Oh,
I
and then
just wanna
Tony.
comment, Our select board passed a policy last night, and we welcomed remote participation because it just increases community involvement in what we do. And we have that ability as the MRC board. Every single meeting we have should be accessible to the public remotely. But I still think there ought to be the expectation, if not the requirement, that board members meet physically in one room and have a conversation. And if one of them can't, so be it. We'll work it out.
Tony?
No offense to any retired person, but maybe once I am retired, I may want to have more in-person meetings. I like the remote meetings because I can shut down, have the meeting and start right back up again. And with Sophie, say the meetings are in Orono, that's 2.5 hours on the road, round trip. But as Bob said, we were fully expected to attend in person. I'll attend in person, except for medical, disability, weather, whatever. It is nice to get away now and then, get across that bridge. Thank you.
My only other comment, I get just to put it out there is number one, I would be surprised if the statute didn't get changed or updated, as Kathy might have been suggesting. So there may be more to come on that. But also it is a policy, so it's something you can change, revoke, whatever you want to do at a future date if you wish to do so. I think the biggest challenge that folks will have that are subject to FOA under this is, I think everyone's been doing a lot of either all virtual or more recently all in person, and the hybrid is more of a logistical challenge, but I've seen where it can be done effectively. So I think that can be overcome. And I would say there's nothing in here, if you're doing all in person, there's nothing that requires you to allow the public or any others to participate remotely, but you can certainly make provisions to allow that to happen. I mean, you can still have a Zoom function for an all in-person meeting. It's only when you have at least one member that's doing remote participation where that is still a requirement. So I think what I've been hearing from a lot of folks is they still intend to have that Zoom feature, if you will, or some other method to allow the public to remote in or watch meetings. I think that's for the reasons that Bob had mentioned. I think people generally like that.
Tony?
John, this policy is in conformance with the law. It can be made more strict, but not reduced in effect, I guess, for lack of a better word. This is a good baseline for a municipality to start with and can add to it.
Yeah, that would be you can certainly add to it so long as it's not inconsistent with
the law,
the statute that authorizes it.
Okay. I like having the remote participation available to the public. It keeps everybody on their toes, I think, including me.
Sophie?
So we have tried to transition to hybrid meetings in Orono for the very reasons everybody else has talked about. I would suggest that we run some trial meetings before we actually run a hybrid forum meeting. Because part of what people like is the ability to see everybody's face and really see the whole meeting and not just a bunch of blobs sitting around a table. Not to say anything about any of my fellow board members, but so I would just really strongly encourage that. And with the idea that we will continue to try to do the hybrid, I would be fully supportive of this. I preferred Dan McKay's vision for compliance, but I understand that Jonathan is pretty good at what he does, so I'll take it.
Tony?
Sophie, are you saying postpone adoption of a policy? And okay.
So my understanding is that this policy is needed to enable us to have remote participation at all. And so we need to have a policy in place to allow that, and that this can stand as it is because it enables that pretty much in any configuration that we want to pursue. And that perhaps as an additional layer to it, separate from this policy, we can adopt as a board a consensus of how we'd like to proceed with meetings. And I don't know if we want to get more formal than that, but I think there's both significant benefits and both pros and cons to in-person meetings and remote meetings. My thought was that I would like to basically state that our quarterly meetings will be in person, and that would be the expectation, kind of like what Bob was outlining. We signed up for that. That's the expectation, that people will make the effort to attend the quarterly meetings in person. And given that we're in this interim period and we're meeting more frequently than quarterly, that the interim meetings would be remote and that we would try to avoid the hybrid model. But I think there's obviously a very strong sense of the board that we'd like to provide remote access for our membership to attend and participate in all meetings remotely, and I fully support that. So that's my feeling about how I'd like to approach this going forward for the near term, at least. Tony?
You want a motion for the policy? Would you like a motion for the policy? I make a John, were you? I make a motion.
I just want to provide one detailed clarification, because I think it harkens back to what Sophie perhaps was getting at. Maybe I wasn't focusing too much on it. So for MRC, it's what I'm really focused on is when you have the board meetings with a full membership, those are the meetings that this is focused on. If you have a a committee meeting where you may not have the full membership, then that would not apply in that instance. But if you have full membership at a committee meeting, then this policy would be triggered that instance. So the policy is specifically triggered when the Freedom of Access Act is applicable to an MRC meeting. Essentially, all the board meetings are like that. There may be subcategory meetings where it may not be. And I think maybe, Sophie, that's maybe what you have been referring to historically, maybe not. Okay. Well, I'd make
Okay.
that clarification point that that's possible.
And does that say, that says there's reference to that in this policy? Isn't there,
Yeah,
John?
I would view this policy applies when the freedom of access applies to MRC meetings.
Huh.
Does that, is that called out in here, just point blank?
Because the policy is pursuant to the Freedom of Access Act, it would only involve those instances where that is actually triggered. There's actually a public proceeding
Okay.
involving MRC where that would apply. Otherwise, it just wouldn't apply.
In layperson's terms, John, that means 3 or more board members are attending.
For example,
Okay, John, if I made a motion subject to you adding that to this, so people, someone like me can read it right there, it is in black and white. Okay, I make a motion that we accept this policy subject to legal, adding what John just described to us.
I'd second that.
It's just clearer for me. Just if it's black, tell me it's black, or white, gray.
All right, we have motion and second. Sophie, did you have a comment? No.
Could I make a comment, Madam Chairman? The setup we have in our municipal conference room allows remote participation simply because it can capture all of the select board members sitting at one table. And at the same time, there's a huge screen that shows anybody and everybody who is participating remotely or who contributes a chat. So we may be requiring ourselves to pick a location and to have certain equipment available in order to accomplish our goal. That's just a comment. I still think the policy should move forward, but that is just a comment. Thank you.
Interesting. I like that, what you described, Bob.
But I think it's all in the detail, Tony, though, because I've seen some municipalities that have done the camera from afar and all you see are little
Yes.
dots around the
Yep.
table. That is
Mhm.
not the kind of technology I'm talking about, and which is why I am advocating for a test run, because there is technology that we can buy if Mike doesn't have it at his office that is transportable, that allows you, it zooms in on individuals as they speak. So it more closely mirrors what you have here. But yeah, I do think it does kind of limit us a little bit, but no, I'm gonna stop.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the policy as the remote meeting policy as presented with a minor amendment to clarify its relationship to FOIA. John, would you call the roll on that, please?
Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Sophie.
Yes.
Tony,
Yes,
Karen.
Yes. Okay. Thank you all for your comments and participation in that. The brave new world as we move forward. But I do have to say, I'd look forward to seeing you all in person again. And maybe sharing a small little brown bag lunch with you. Kathy, we'll miss you.
I'll miss you guys too.
With that, we're moving. I think the next item is the acceptance of your resignation. Board member resignation and vacancy appointment. So
No.
Kathy, submitted a letter to the board, which I emailed out to folks this morning. And she has her resignation effective tonight at 5 p.m. So we get you for a little bit longer today. But as we know, you're moving on from your position with the City of Bangor to yet another esteemed position working for the Maine Municipal Association, which we're all looking forward to seeing your accomplishments there. But I personally just wanted to thank you very much for your many years of service on this board. I know at times it was a bit of a labor of love, but your contributions have been notable and very much appreciated. Your comments were always well-spoken and very effective. You spoke with passion and from the heart, and really helped steer us in the right direction with that right amount of force and verve. We're really going to miss you, and we really wish you well in your endeavors. Oh, and with that, we have a great little thing for you to remember us by, and to recognize your years of service for the MRC and the members.
Thank you. That was very nice.
Does anybody else have any comments? Tony?
I want to thank Kathy for, you're right. If you turn that glass on that just right, there's a picture of us. No, I'm just kidding. But thank you for your efforts. It's greatly appreciated. And I also want to thank you for your encouragement and words of support these last few months. Thank you.
Bob?
I just want to thank Kathy for all the hard work she's done, even during the short time I've been on this committee. And to say that the MMA is very lucky to have her joining that organization as its executive director. So if we have to accept your resignation, then it's with great reluctance.
Thank you.
Mike?
I just want to thank Kathy. The last few months have been very trying, and she's been a great resource for me to give a call to every now and then and bounce stuff off of, and been a big help during all this. So I want to thank her for all her support, and you will be missed.
Well, Kathy, Sophie?
Oh, if you're ready to wrap, no. Kathy, you are, you have been an amazing board member, and the success that we have had to date, especially in the political realm, I think rests pretty squarely at your feet. And we've learned a lot from you, and you're going to leave some incredibly large sneakers to fill. But now you're a state advocate, so we might still be calling. Thanks for everything. You will be missed in the region.
John, do we actually need to vote to accept the resignation, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I say one thing before you do that? Just want
Oh,
to
please. Yeah.
make a point. When Bob said he was resigning, he told me there was nothing to this. You go quarterly, you get a cookie and lunch, and you call it a day. And I think that from the time that I landed into MRC, I don't remember the simplicity of any of it. You guys have worked incredibly hard, and at times you've taken some unfair shots. I remember sitting in a meeting where people accused you of getting paid $200,000 during this whole process. Maybe a meeting. You used your personal time. You went to meetings on weekends and evenings, and you didn't do it because there was anything in it for you other than the region would benefit. It would be easy for some municipalities, and they did, to jump off and go somewhere else, but that wasn't a solution for every municipality. There were only limited options to do that for the off-ramp, and binding together and sticking together and looking for a solution was the only thing. This hasn't worked out as well as we had expected. The plant worked. We had that one bright shining moment of success. But you guys have you have the best interest of our community members. You have the best interest of Bangor at heart and all the communities. You have worked tirelessly to lead the way. I'm a baby. You've done good stuff, and I've learned a lot from all of you. So sorry.
You're human.
We're gonna miss you, Kathy.
So
We're gonna miss you.
keep doing it, and I'll advocate for the work you've done. You've looked not to just dump the garbage, but to find a real solution. And I don't think people understand the amount of time, work, effort you've put in, not for any personal gain and not even for a single municipality gain. Any one of us could have been the one to jump off for individual municipality gain. And that would have been it. The rest of us would have been stranded. So to all of you who spent so much time and so much effort, you're amazing.
Excellent words, Kathy. Thank you.
Sorry for being a baby. That's what I am.
Isn't it awful when you're human?
All right, with that, it's very difficult, but I'll accept a motion to accept Kathy's resignation.
So moved, so moved.
I had a motion
Second.
and a second. John, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Dana,
Yes, and we'll miss you, Kathy.
Bob,
Yes, I'll see you around, Kathy.
You'll be my boss.
Kevin.
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes, I'm looking forward to going to Easton with you.
Sophie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
and Karen.
Yes, with much regret. All right, well, with that, we now have, as of 5 p.m. today, a vacancy on the board. And I believe, John, perhaps you could just fill us in on how the bylaws handle this, but I believe we have the opportunity to fill that vacancy through the end of the term.
Correct. Whenever a vacancy may occur on the board, the bylaws state that the board of directors can essentially fill that position. And that anyone that is appointed in that capacity, they serve until the next annual meeting, which is coming up later this year. So the board, if it wishes to do so, it could do that right now. For example, if there's an individual in mind to basically fill that vacancy at the upcoming annual meeting, that position would need to be elected at that time.
Okay, thank you. Sophie, did you have a question?
I was, if you're ready for a comment. Sure. So we've faced this several times in the past, and we've used different methods to fill the vacant position. The last time we did this, we opened it up and accepted nominations and then went through this, is it this person or that person? And it didn't feel good. I didn't enjoy the process, and I don't think it really added anything. Every year there's an opportunity for people who are interested to put their name in and run for election. When we have a mid-year resignation, there is a very short amount of time, and it feels like we need to be appointing somebody who can kind of hit the ground running and that fills a void. And right now, one of our voids is number one, Bangor. Somebody, Bangor has historically always had a representative on the MRC board. And they represent the lion's share of the waste. I also think we need somebody who technically understands the waste industry and can provide some support to Mike. So I think, I know who I would like to appoint, but I don't know if you're ready for that yet. But I would really advocate strongly that we just make an appointment and get somebody on the board that can immediately give us some results without a long drawn out process.
Bob?
I agree with Sophie. Sophie, if you have someone in mind, please bring the name forward.
Tony?
Our bylaws, John, allow us to appoint somebody today.
Yes, they do. You can, they don't specify any specific process, just that majority of the board can appoint that person. You can essentially, you could choose to do that today. You could do some different process if you want. It's up to the board.
Tony?
If Sophie has
Tony?
someone she would put forward,
I
I
would-
would take that individual on her suggestion slash recommendation.
I would nominate Aaron Hootery, who is the Public Works Director for the city of Bangor, who's been following what we've been doing.
I would second that nomination.
Thank you. And I have noticed that Aaron has been attending pretty much all of our meetings in the last number of months, certainly this calendar year. Any other comments or suggestions from the board?
Can I vote for my replacement?
I think you can. You're good until 5 p.m.
Yeah,
Tony?
The fact that the fellow's been following us at least this calendar year is a big plus.
Yeah, I would agree. I had the opportunity to meet him last night, actually, at Kathy's event. Very nice gentleman with experience in the waste industry, big operations guy. I have confidence that he'll be a good asset.
So,
Okay, with that, John, Mike, did you want to make a comment?
yes, Karen. So Aaron is actually, I see him attending the meeting now. So if you would like Jesse to bring him over and after you guys vote for a quick introduction, then that would be doable.
Great, let's do that. Let's take the vote here, John.
in just one point of order, just to clarify, I was just peeking at the bylaws. I think it'd be appropriate, Kathy, since it does call for a majority vote of the remaining directors. So even though your resignation is not effective until 5 p.m., I think the more consistent approach would be just have the remaining directors, a majority of those folks vote.
Fair enough.
So if there's
All
no
right, John,
further,
would you call the roll then?
happy to do so. Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yeah.
Melissa,
Yes.
Sophie.
Yes,
Tony,
Yes,
and Karen.
Yes. So we able to bring Aaron in for a quick hello?
Taking care of it right now.
Great.
See me?
Yeah, there he
Hi,
is.
Aaron.
Hello, everyone.
How are you doing?
Good. I appreciate the kind words from Sophie. And I think to echo her words, some very large shoes to fill. But in my short time here in my position, I've noticed that solid waste and recycling is extremely important to the residents of Bangor. That's why I've been on every meeting since I was appointed to this position and pestering Mike and Kathy and whoever else in order to get better services for the residents. And now I can see that really makes sense for the much larger group. That same thing needs to happen for everyone. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron, for agreeing
I
to.
could be a part of this.
Great. Well, nice to meet you. We'll be seeing a lot more of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay. Now we're on to the public comment portion of the meeting. We do have a couple questions that have been submitted into the Q&A. If you have any other comments, folks, please do put them in the Q&A. I do want to remind everyone that we do have a town hall meeting next Thursday, August 5th at 11 a.m. that we'll be spending plenty of time doing Q&A and talking in much more detail about the plant, its reopening plans. DTE will be on board to answer questions in person. With that, I will look at the questions that we have in the Q&A. This first one says, I live in Pretty Marsh. Don't you think that after 8 months of giving DTE an exclusive option to complete the purchase of the Hampton plant, it's time to reopen the bidding process and see if there are other interested parties to purchase and operate the plant? Why should Mainers think that DTE is a real bidder? Has any members of the MRC board ever read the DTE website? It's information that is old and stale. Their website does not even mention that it is looking to acquire the Hampton plant. All valid comments, I would say. The board is about to adjourn to an executive session to talk directly with the bondholder trustee and DTE about some of these very issues. Obviously, actually, I'm not sure how much concern was expressed, but certainly in the finance committee meeting, we discussed the concerns about the delays in the process and the lack of their ability to close on the financing. So that is foremost in our mind, and we'll be addressing that, and we'll be hearing directly from DTE next week about what their situation is. Sophie, did you have a comment?
Well, just, the one thing about remote and having questions typed in, you can read a lot into questions that may or may not be there. But part of what I read into that was the idea that the MRC has not done due diligence. And I just want to go back to the fact that we're not bringing any bidder to the table. The bondholders are, and I think we have done a degree of diligence, but we kind of have to dance with the people that are brought to the dance. And I think we've kind of hit that drum quite a bit, but I think it bears repeating.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. We have another question. Has the MRC ever learned more about where DTE currently operates in the United States or abroad? Has DTE submitted to the MRC its plan for reopening the plant? What has been done, how much it will cost, and how long it will take? Will the plant reopen by the end of the year? From MRC's perspective, is it right that there remains a veil of secrecy over who is DTE, what their plans are for the plant, any details about the DTE bid, and what benefits the communities of MRC will receive? Really, again, these are probably better addressed next week when DTE will be on site. They can be addressed directly to DTE. But I mean, I would not say there's been a veil of secrecy. We're working as hard as we can to facilitate DTE's reopening of the plant. As Sophie pointed out, we're not the owners of the plant and these are not our bidders, but we're doing everything we can to ensure that we can come to fruition and transition to a new owner of the plant. So I don't know what else to say. Let's see. Another question from Steve Globerman. Would the MRC's lawyers give their perspective about whether there are real substantive outstanding issues among the bondholders, DTE and the MRC, and when they foresee an agreement being signed by the parties? Once an agreement is signed, how long will it be until the sale occurs? Mike Carroll mentioned about a receiver. Is there currently a receiver of Coastal Resources appointed? What is the receiver's name? If not, why not? Does the MRC believe there will be a signed agreement by the MRC's next quarterly meeting in October? Again, these are all issues that we'll be discussing today in executive session. We don't expect any resolution on any of these things, but we do expect to have more information to report next week, much of it coming directly from DTE. Regarding the receiver, there's not a receiver in place. And again, we'll have more information about that, but my understanding is that the receiver won't be appointed until the financing is in place. So there's kind of a step process, which we'll be going over more at the town hall meeting. And I would say there'll be a signed agreement by the next meeting. Otherwise, we'll perhaps have a different process. We're coming close to December and the upcoming winter, and progress needs to be made to get the plant reopened. Okay, more questions from Steve Globerman. Had a lot of questions. Under current circumstances, there should continue to be remote access to the public to attend meetings of the MRC if legally possible. Let the sunshine in. Hear, hear. I believe the board is in agreement with that. How many bidders did the bondholders bring to the table? More than DTE? Oh, yes, I believe there were, Mike, maybe you can answer that, 3 or 4 companies,
There were-
bidders?
When this all started, when the letters went out, there were 7 in total. And that went through 2 questionnaires, dwindled down to 3, and then the remaining was only the DTE.
Thank you. So Steve Glover makes the comment that there's no question that I suspect he's thinking the MRC board is working hard, but 8 months and nothing to show for it. We're frustrated as well, looking for movement. We expect there to be some changes and announcements hopefully in the next couple weeks. So stay tuned and please do try to tune in to the town hall meeting next Thursday. It will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it at your leisure if you're not available to make it in person at 11 a.m. next Thursday. With that, I believe that's all of the questions that we had in the public comment section. As I mentioned, we're planning to adjourn for 2 back-to-back executive sessions. One to discuss legal issues and a second to conduct the annual performance evaluation of our executive director. At this time, we're not anticipating any actions other than a consideration of an adjustment to the executive director's pay. But we will be adjourning after those executive sessions back into public sessions. So if you wanted to stay on this line, you're welcome to. We'll be conducting our executive sessions in a separate chat meeting venue. As I mentioned, we have a town hall meeting next Thursday at 11 a.m. that will be conducted remotely. And after that, we have our next quarterly board meeting scheduled for October 27th at 10 a.m. with a finance committee preceding it at 9 a.m. Currently, we're anticipating holding that meeting in person in Orono, but there'll be more on that to come. With that, I would entertain a motion from someone to go into our first executive session.
So moved.
I believe,
Second.
Tony, you're going to need to
Yes.
read that.
As soon as I said that, I realized that. I make a motion that we go into executive session for 1 MRS 4056E for discussions regarding contractual matters with MRC's corporate attorney.
Second.
Motion and a second. John, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Sophie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
Karen.
Yes. As I mentioned, this meeting link will remain open while we're in our executive session. Board members, you'll need to leave this and enter into your other Zoom link to get to executive session number 1. Is that correct, John?
Yep, I'll open up the executive session here shortly as soon as we leave this. And
Yeah,
Mike,
but-
And for any members of the public attending, we do expect these executive sessions to be on the lengthy side. Yes, Mike?
Before everybody jumps off, we tend to have a couple questions at the end, just as everybody jumps over. Sophie, did you have something you wanted to say?
I just wanted a 5-minute break.
That's what I thought, so
yeah.
that's what I saw.
So
Thank you. Good point.
if we leave
Bob?
this, we'll get a prompt to join the new one, or do we need to go to a separate email
Oh.
for?
Everybody got 2 emails yesterday and from Jonathan Pottle. One says executive session 1, and that's where you want to go. And then on your next executive session, then we'll come back into here. And then on your next executive session, you'll go to executive session number 2. And they say it right on the meeting, number 1 and number 2. You want to enter number 1 right now.
Thank you.
All right. See you all in 5 minutes.
There you go.
Thanks, Jesse. So we're just waiting for one more board member to return, and then we'll be considering a vote to go into our next executive session. All right. With a quorum of board members present, we're back in public session, and we completed our first executive session, and I would now consider a motion to go into our second executive session.
Make a motion, we go into executive session 1 MRS 405-6A to conduct executive director annual performance review. Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments or discussion? John, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, Dana,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Sophie.
Yes.
And Karen.
Yes. And I will comment that Tony and Kathy sent their apologies for not being able to participate in this session. And I will also make the comment that we do anticipate taking an action as a board afterwards for consideration of adjustment of the executive director's pay. And with that, we will leave this meeting space and go and click on the second email that John sent yesterday, executive session number 2, please. And Mike will let you know when you can join us. Are we good to go, Jesse?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We are back in public session after having concluded an executive session to conduct our executive director's performance review. And it's no surprise to anyone that he received stellar reviews across the board. Mike is doing an incredible job for MRC and its members, shepherding the organization through this very challenging transition time. He's the reason we're hopeful and confident that the plant will reopen. And we really appreciate his dedication to that task. He's really taken it on, as one of our board members pointed out when we hired him 2 years ago in July of 2019. This was not his part of the job. He was coming into a plant that was operating in a new endeavor that he thought he was going to be overseeing on behalf of members. But it's become something different, but he's taken it on with gusto and has just been doing a phenomenal job making sure it's continuing on the path towards reopening. And we so appreciate that. And our members do appreciate that as well. With that, I would entertain a motion from a board member for consideration for adjustment of salary. Bob.
I move that we adjust the annual salary of our executive director to $110,000 a year, with the adjustment to be taken from contingency and the adjustment to be made to the budget for the current fiscal year.
Second the motion.
And to be effective July 1st, 2021.
July 1. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
And was there a second?
Second the motion.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from the board? No, seeing none. Bob, do you have a comment?
Just to reiterate that, Mike, this is well-deserved, and it's a small token of our appreciation for everything you've done during the past year to keep things on an even keel and to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the board. Like I said, I really appreciate the support and I appreciate what you've done. So thank you.
All right, John, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Dana,
Yes.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Bob,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Sophie. Oh, I think Sophie froze up.
I think she froze out. Yeah.
Oh, Karen.
Yes. We gonna try to get Sophie back in, or?
Maybe give it a moment. Oh,
Nope, just going out and coming back. While we're waiting for Sophie to come back, I will remind folks that we do have a town hall meeting scheduled for Thursday, August 5th at 11 a.m. via Zoom. And we'll be providing an update and more details on where the plan stands with reopening and taking questions and answers at that time. Does it look like Sophie's coming back in?
I'm texting her now. She's trying to get back in.
Okay. She wants to go on record. All right, well,
Yes, but I don't think that counts. Oh, here she comes.
oh,
Here she is.
Sophie, you're the last vote. We're on the edge. We were wondering.
Oh, of course.
All right. It's unanimous. Thank you all so much for all your time today. I know this was a long board meeting and we're talking about how much we appreciate shorter board meetings, but I think we covered a lot of ground and we've got a good idea of what the path looks like going forward. And well, I guess we'll be seeing you all next week at our town hall. Any other thoughts from the board?
Thank you.
No. All right. I call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion
Thank you.
adjourned.
Bye-bye.
Second.
So moved. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.